What I'll do now is I'll take your questions that you've submitted so far. I'll answer as many of them as I can. And like I said, please don't worry. If you're watching this later, if you're not watching this live, or you think of a question later, do feel free to write to the Academy page or write to myself, Swami Vishwananda, and then I can address those questions regardless. Like I said, if you did do that last time and I haven't answered you yet, that's because I was out of the ashram and out of the country for the last 2 weeks, so that will not be the case moving forward now for the next 2 weeks, okay? So, I'm going to go with some of the questions that have been sent so far. First question is, in the context of buddhi, the discriminatory faculty, is conscious a part of it? And if so, how can it be neutral? Okay, good question. So consciousness, as we call it, chit, is not part of it. Let me be very clear in explaining why not. When I explained to you the mind, I said that the mind is part of the material world. That means it is part of creation. And the mind has 4 facets. And I said it was manas, it was ahamkara, it was chitta, and it was buddhi. And buddhi was the discriminatory faculty that is able to look at a situation without any pollution, without any corruption of ego, and just assess the situation and provide the right decision. Now, the reason why consciousness is not part of that is because consciousness is an attribute of the soul, not of the mind. And consciousness, therefore, is a spiritual thing, because the soul is spiritual, not material. I said that in the very first part of the course, that the soul is purusha, spiritual nature, not prakriti, material nature. Therefore, any attribute of the soul, like consciousness, is not part of the body's attributes or the mind's attributes, because that is a different construct altogether, a different creation, so to speak. Now, what I did say was that it is through the buddhi that we can access the consciousness, because the buddhi is the gateway from the material part of ourselves to the spiritual part of ourselves. So you could argue that the consciousness of the soul feeds the buddhi from inside to out, if the buddhi is introverted and is accepting of that and has resolved to, let's say, surrender to that. But because we are predominantly influenced by our ahamkar, that introverted process does not happen. And so what the buddhi does is it just takes the information that we receive through our senses, through the manas. It takes all our previous experiences that are stored in the chit, our lake of impressions and memory, and makes the best decision with the information it has available to it. Okay? And therefore, the reason I say it is neutral is because essentially it is able to make a decision that is best not only for oneself, but for the environment around oneself as well, not conditioned by ahamkar, ego. Okay? So I hope that answers the question. The second question is bear to the core question: what is Atma? What is Jeeva? So I'm assuming you're asking if there is a distinction between the two. So the distinction, if there exists one, is only philosophical, okay, not existential. So let me explain. Atma is often referred to, and I'm not going to, now it is outside of Sri Vaishnava circles, I'm talking about general philosophical understandings. Atma is referred to the spiritual dimension of yourself, or let's say the spiritual dimension permeating the material dimension, so to speak. Whereas Jeeva already inherently says that that spiritual dimension is individualized. It carries identity. Okay? Now, because Vaishnavas don't believe that there is any other type of soul, meaning they believe the soul always has identity and it is always individual, then for us, whether you call it Atma or Jeeva, is the same. But because some philosophies would say that the Atma is equal to Brahman, meaning the Atma is not an individual thing, it is the whole, then Jeeva is the word they will use to refer to the deluded concept of the Atma, the idea that we are individual beings, and the truth is that we are all just one. That is the philosophy of, for example, Adi Shankaracharya's Advaita Vedanta. So there, the distinction between Jeeva and Atma makes a lot more sense than in Sri Vaishnavism, where we don't really have that conceptualization of two different possibilities of souls. Souls are always individualized, so to speak, and therefore there's no issue on which term we use, whether we use Atma or Jeeva. We mean the same thing. Okay? The next question. If my interpretation is wrong, please correct me. I understand that to safeguard our life in this world, the ahankar faculty of mind is necessary. Should we reduce its influence in the mind to the point of excluding it? That's a good question. So what you're essentially saying is that the ahankar also has sort of a self-preservation mechanism because it looks out for ourselves. And then if we remove it altogether from our decision-making processes and our decision-making faculty, it would be as if we are now sabotaging that self-preservation element of our lives. I would say that there's a right way of doing that and there's a wrong way of doing that. And ultimately it starts by having a wrong concept about what we're doing here. I would say it like this. The ahamkar is self-preservating of your material identity because it only knows it, your material identity. So the ahamkar preserves your body, it preserves your mind, your ego, your character, personality, and your material interests. It has no business in preserving or cultivating or positively feeding your soul, which is the far more important thing to do. If you were to exclude it from the decision-making process, then what would take its place? That's an important question. It would be buddhi. Buddhi does not ignore you. Buddhi just makes the decision that is not only good for you, but good for everyone else too. Meaning it just makes the right decision. And there's a big difference between the right decision and the decision that is most pleasurable to you. That is a very, very different thing, okay? Because I can do things that are pleasurable to me, but harmful to my environment, even harmful to myself long term. But often doing the right thing for the environment and myself long term might mean some kind of unpleasurable experience in the short term. And the ahamkar will never do that. And therefore, don't fear that an ahamkar being suppressed means that we will no longer care about ourselves and that we will somehow suffer as a result of that. We will simply act correctly. Whether that means that we have to pay some price for that or not, it will be done from a correct judgment, from a correct discernment. And that is the way to understand it, okay? Not to go into a potential fear of ahamkar being required in that way. The one positive function that ahamkar serves, and this is now in an ultimate sense, is that it gives us identity, an identity that we require or that we maintain in a sense so that we have a relationship with God from one to another. But there's nothing else of any value there in the ahamkar. Okay? The next and final question is Swami Vishwananda, besides not being different from God, is he at the same time Nitya Suri? So I guess the question is really asking what is the status or the position of Swami Vishwananda? Is he a Nitya Suri or is he God? What is he? So actually this is a question I'd rather probably not address in this course, and the reason for that is because it's not something that we can declare as an information that is to be universally accepted. That is, I think, up to the individual realization and perception of the individual inquiring into his nature. And we inquire into his nature, I don't mean intellectually, but we inquire experientially. Because intellectually it is very difficult to determine the nature of somebody. I'll give you an example. Ramanujacharya himself was said to be an incarnation of Anantashesha, the snake upon which Narayana lies down. So by definition, he is a Nitya Suri, meaning eternally liberated. And yet he incarnated here on earth. And there were several individuals who did not recognize that in him. They tried to kill him, or they saw him and denied him. For example, when he requested initiation into the Om Namo Narayanaya mantra, he was denied by a guru even. And so can we say that those persons were all just playing a game and they knew Ramanuja's real status? No, they did not. Which means that even if somebody is in fact a Nitya Suri of the highest order, as was Ramanujacharya, it does not mean people will be able to recognize, even learned people. And so there has to be a process, I would say, of individual inquiry And that inquiry, my recommendation is that it should happen from a more profound source than our intellectual perceptions and our manas. Because if we are to look on the external faculties of things, we can come only to external conclusions. If we look at a superficial nature of somebody, we can only come to superficial conclusions. And so I'm going to refrain from committing to one position or another. What I would say is that whether you regard him as a Nitya Suri, eternally liberated being, or as Bhagwan himself, or even as a Mukta Jeeva, a Jeeva like any of us that has become liberated, I think that is up to you. But the only thing I would say is unacceptable under all circumstances is to view your own guru as anything less than a liberated soul. At that point, essentially the question then arises of the suitability of that person for that role and the suitability for you to surrender to such an individual if they are anything less than absolutely situated in God consciousness, so to speak. And the ways to be in God consciousness are simple. Either you are God or you're fully realized of God. You got your two options there. So we'll leave it there. He's one of the two, either fully realized of God or he is God. So that's up to each individual to find out. Okay? Yeah, okay, so that's it for today. We'll take any more questions, as I said, if you send them through later on upon watching the video. I was, again, really happy to do this. The feedback on the first one was really good. And another thing, there were some of you who sent me personal feedback about some of the things you would love to see implemented into these webinars. I have received them and I will get back to you on them. Like I said, I was out of work for the last 2 weeks, so I think there was some really constructive feedback. So again, if you have ideas about what you would like to see, be it the content or the format or anything really, just feel free, write to the Academy page. We'll read it all and we'll take it into consideration about what we can do to serve you guys best, okay? So that's it for today. Thank you again. We'll probably see each other in a couple of weeks again for the next topic in this series of understanding Hinduism, understanding Sanatana Dharma, and the second one in the series after Atma will be Brahman. So understanding Brahman, God, what is God, who is God, in a very similar way as we did today for the soul. So, Jai Gurudev.